Water rose through the ground where no water had been in living memory, seeping up dark and cold into the print of a small cloven hoof, and a woman knelt beside it, with her skirts soaked to the knee and her hands shaking, not from cold but from the terrible weight of understanding. Around her the sheep pressed close and patient, 120 gaunt bodies smelling of dust and dry wool, and they had done this thing. They had stamped it open with their sharp, starving feet. The whole valley below her was cracked to gray flint by 2 summers without rain, and every well from the river to the ridge had gone to powder, and men with money and men with land had prayed and dug and cursed and come up dry. And here on the worst ground anyone had ever thrown away, a woman who had paid $30 for a flock everyone said was already dead, had found the one thing the drought could not kill. 3 springs earlier, none of it had happened yet. 3 springs earlier, Marta Kell came down off the freight wagon at the edge of a town called Dry Fork, with everything she owned in a single carpet bag, and $40 sewn into the hem of her coat, and 30 of those dollars would soon be gone. She was 26 years old, and she had buried a father in the spring, and a mother the winter before that, and there was no one left behind her, and no one waiting ahead, and she had learned in those 2 hard years that a person alone could either lie down under the weight of it or set their shoulder against it and push. She had chosen to push. The land agent in Dry Fork looked her over, the way men looked over a woman who arrived without a husband, with a mixture of pity and amusement that she had come to know the way a farmer knows the smell of coming rain. He told her plainly that there was nothing here for a woman on her own. The good bottom land was taken. The rest was rock and thornbrush, and a stubbornness in the soil that had broken better folk than her. She thanked him and asked what was cheap. He laughed at that and told her the only thing cheap in the county was the old van place up on the high ground, 60 acres of gravel and gray clay that hadn't grown a decent crop in a decade, and it came with a flock of sheep the bank wanted gone, before they starved on the property and became a matter of complaint. $30, he said. And don't say I didn't warn you, she said. She would take it. The sheep, when she walked out to see them, were a sight to break a soft heart and confirm every hard word the town had spoken. There were 120 of them, or near enough. And they were thin as fence rails, their wool matted and full of burrs, their ribs standing out under it like the staves of empty barrels. The bankman who walked her out held a handkerchief to his nose and said she would be lucky to bury them before they stank, and that she'd have done better to spend her $30 on a train ticket back to wherever she'd come from. He was not being cruel exactly. It is easier for a man to warn a woman off than to imagine her succeeding where he could not. Marta said nothing to him. She had learned that stillness unsettled such men more than argument ever could, and besides, she was busy looking. She was always looking, and where the bankman saw carrion, she saw eyes that were still bright, feet that still stamped the ground, mouths that still worked at the thornbrush no one else would touch. These sheep were starving, yes, but they were not dying. There is a difference, and she had spent enough hungry nights to know it in her bones. A creature that keeps eating what it can find has not given up, and a creature that has not given up can be brought back. She signed the paper, and she counted out $30, and she became, to the everlasting amusement of Dry Fork, the woman who paid good money for dead sheep. The house on the van place was 2 rooms with a sod roof and a lean-to that had once been a barn, and the first night Marta slept there, with the wind pouring through the chinks, she lay awake doing the arithmetic. $10 left in the hem of her coat, 120 sheep that needed feeding, and no feed, and a pasture the color of ash. If she bought hay, she would be broke by June, and the sheep would still be thin. If she bought nothing, they would fail slowly, and she would fail with them. She turned it over and over the way you turn a stone, looking for the dry side, and somewhere near dawn she found it, the thornbrush. The whole high ground was choked with the stuff, a low silver-gray scrub that cattle wouldn't touch, and that the previous owner had cursed and tried to burn out for years. But the sheep ate it. She had watched them do it. Where a cow saw poison, a sheep saw supper, and she had 60 acres of supper that had cost her nothing, and that everyone else considered a plague. She did not need to buy feed. She needed to move the sheep to the feed, patch by patch, and let them clear one thicket before she opened the next, and rest the cleared ground behind them. It was not hay. It was better than hay because it was free, and free was the only price she could afford. She rose before the light, and she began. Her days took a shape after that, and the shape did not change for a long while. She was up before the sun cracked the ridge, and she went out to the flock with a coil of old wire and a hatchet, and she built little fences of thorn and stake to hold the sheep on one patch until they had eaten it to the ground. Then she moved them. She hauled water up from a slough at the bottom of the property, 2 buckets at a time on a yoke across her shoulders, until her hands went rough as bark and the yoke wore the cloth clean through, and then wore a callus into the flesh beneath. She pulled burrs from wool by the hour. She learned the sheep as individuals, the bold ewe who led and the timid one who trailed, the ram with the crooked horn, the lamb born small who she carried inside her coat for a week until it found its feet. The town watched her from a distance and did not offer help, because help would have meant admitting there was something worth helping. When she walked into Dry Fork for salt or thread, men touched their hats and hid their smiles, and women asked, in that soft poisoned way, whether the poor things had died yet. She said they were coming along. They laughed at that too. Coming along, and the strange thing was that they were. By June, the thorn brush and the water and the patient tending had put flesh back on the flock. Their wool grew out clean where she'd cleared the burrs. Their eyes were bright and their feet were hard, and though she told no one, she banked the knowledge low in her chest like a coal under ash, and she waited. There was one man in that country who did not laugh at her, and his name was Joseph Halverson, and he had come over from the old country 40 years before with nothing but a wife long since buried, and a way of speaking that fell soft and strange on the ear. He farmed the quarter section next to the Van place, and he had grown old and bent, watching men fail on land that would not answer to them, and he had learned the one lesson that most of them never did. He came up her track one evening, leaning on a stick, and he stood at her thorn fence and watched the sheep graze the scrub in the failing light, and he was quiet a long while. Then he said, "They told me a young woman bought the dead flock, and I said to myself, here is either a fool or someone who can see." He looked at her. "You are not a fool." She asked him how he knew. He said, "Because the fool buys the good land and starves on it, thinking the land owes him, but the land owes nobody. The land only answers the one who asks it the right question. These sheep, this brush, this gravel, that grows nothing a man wants. You did not ask the land to be something else. You asked it what it already was, and you listened. That is the whole secret, and no one wants to hear it because it is slow." He tapped the ground with his stick. "Everything worth having grows slow," he said, "and everything that comes fast is either a gift or a robbery, and you cannot tell which until it is gone." She gave him coffee, and he came often after that, and he taught her things her books could not, how to read the sky, and the set of the sheep's ears, how to tell a ewe near to lambing, how to smell water in a low place. She had been alone a long time. It was good to have a voice at the fire that did not laugh. The wool clip that first year was small because the flock had been so poor when she bought them, but it was clean and it was long staple, and it fetched more per pound at the depot than the buyer expected, and Marta walked home with real money in her hand for the first time since her father died. The second year the clip doubled, and the lambs she had raised through their first hard winter dropped lambs of their own, so that her 120 became 170, and then past 200, all of them fed on brush and slow water that cost her nothing but the strength of her own back. One word crept around the depot that the Kell wool was the best in 3 counties, and a buyer from the city came out personally to see the flock, a round, careful man named Ackerley, who had handled wool for 30 years and did not throw praise around. He ran the fleece through his fingers a long time, and he weighed a sample on his little brass scale. And he looked at Marta with new eyes and said, "I was told these were dying sheep on ruined ground." She said, "They were." He said, "Then you have done something I have not seen done, and I have seen a great deal," and he wrote her a contract for the whole clip, at a price that made the depot men blink. The town heard about that too. It is a curious thing how the same men who laughed loudest go quietest first. They did not apologize. Men rarely do. But the hats came off a little slower now, and the soft poisoned questions stopped, and in their place came a watchful, grudging silence, which from Dry Fork was very nearly respect. Then the rain stopped. It did not stop all at once the way a door slams. It stopped the way a debt comes due, slowly, and then all at the same time. The first summer, the creek ran low, and men said it was a dry year, and dry years pass. The second summer it did not run at all, and August arrived like the open door of a furnace, and the last of the green went brown and then gray, and the wells that had fed the town for a generation began to fail. First, the shallow ones, then the deep ones, then the deepest of all. Cattle died standing in dust that had been pasture. The good bottomland that every prosperous man in the county had held so proudly baked into a cracked gray floor you could turn an ankle in, and the deep river that had never failed, shrank to a chain of green stinking pools, and then to nothing but a bed of white stones. Marta's slough dried too, and her heart went cold the first morning. She found it a cracked black hollow, because she had 230 sheep now, and no water. Was no water no matter how clever you were about feed. She hauled from the town well until the town well ran dry. She counted the arithmetic in the dark again, and this time the arithmetic said only one word, which was death. And it said it to everyone in the valley at once, the rich man and the poor and the woman on the ruined high ground alike. The drought did not care who had laughed. It was the sheep that found it, and this is the part the town would tell for 50 years after. In the worst of it, half mad with thirst, the flock would not settle at night, but milled and stamped on a low, bare rise at the top of the property that Marta had never grazed, because nothing grew there, only hard gray clay swept clean by the wind. Kosef, who was dying that summer, though neither of them yet said it aloud, watched them from his stick and said in his soft voice, "The animals smell what the men have forgotten. Dig there." She dug where their feet had pounded the clay to a wet, dark bruise, and a foot down the soil turned to cool mud, and 3 feet down water welled up into the hole faster than she could bail it. Water that had been sleeping under that scorned rise all along, held in the gray clay the whole valley had cursed. Waiting for something with sharp, starving feet to hammer it away, she widened the seep with a spade, and lined it with stone, and it filled and did not fail, not that day nor the next, nor through the whole burning length of that terrible summer. On the high ground everyone had thrown away. On the worst land in the county water rose, while the great river lay dead in its bed below. And Marta Kell knelt beside the first small pool of it, with her skirts soaked to the knee, and she understood at last what Yosef had meant. She had asked the land what it was, and it had answered her, and the answer was more than she had ever dared to hope. She could have named any price she wanted. That is the truth of it, and there is no use pretending otherwise. For hunger and thirst make a town into a thing that will pay whatever is asked. And the men who had mocked her stood now at her thorn fence with cracked lips and empty buckets, and their pride in their hands. A woman with a lesser heart, or only a harder one, might have looked at that line of humbled faces, and remembered every smile behind a handkerchief, and every soft poisoned question, and might have made them pay in coin for all of it. Marta thought about it. She was not a saint, and she did the arithmetic that way too, one night the profit of it. And then she thought of her own hungry years, and of Joseph's word robbery, the thing that comes fast and cannot be told from a gift until it is gone, and she made her choice. She opened the seep to the whole valley. She charged nothing for the water itself, only asked that each family bring their own strength to help widen the pools and haul for those too weak to haul, so that the thing that had saved her would save all of them together, and no one would be one person alone against the drought, as she had once been one person alone against the town. The proud neighbor who had warned her off her own land came with his children, and he could not meet her eyes, and she handed him a full bucket and said only, "Drink," and there was no gloating in it, because being right is its own kind of reply and needs no help from a sharp tongue. The valley drank at the well the sheep had made. And in the fall, the rains came back at last, soft and gray over the ridge, and Joseph lived just long enough to see the creek run again before he went to his rest. And his last words to her at the fire were that the land owes nobody, but it remembers the one who listened. They buried him on the high ground, within sight of the seep that never dried, and Mardochelle stayed on that ruined gravel the rest of her long life, and grew rich and old and quiet upon it, and to the end of her days, when strangers asked how she had done it, she would only smile and say she had paid $30 for a flock of starving sheep, because they were the only ones in the whole valley wise enough to know where the water was.